Executive of the MHRA and has also held posts in the WHO and EMA. Over to you, Dr. Raine.
Good morning, everyone, and it really is an enormous honour to be contributing to this very special 90th anniversary meeting of the Society in homage to Professor Sir Alasdair Breckenridge. I know it would take an entire meeting to do full justice to Sir Alasdair's contribution right across so many fields of science, of medicine, and of public health. So my aim in this short talk is to give a more focused account, to share with you Sir Alasdair's tremendous leadership in regulation, which has truly defined not only our UK regulator, but many regulators right round the world. I think it's no overstatement to say that Sir Alasdair's leadership in regulation is without parallel. He was a giant in our world. And his legacy, I think, can be best summed up in the 3 words he imprinted on everyone. His touchstone, if you like: regulation follows science. And in the coming presentation, I'll give you an insight into how Alasdair not only shaped our today, but has laid the foundation for regulation long into the future. But what, you may ask, were the influences on Alasdair leading to this pivotal role in medicines regulation? An alumnus of St Andrews University in both biochemistry and medicine, and specialist training at the Royal Postgraduate Medical School with Sir Colin Dollery, and then leading to his appointment in 1974 as head of Department of Pharmacology at Liverpool University, where he also worked closely with the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. So that was his shaping, and the rest in our world of regulation is what you might call history. Not those wonderful historic seats of learning, I'm afraid, but a 70s tower block somewhere south of the Thames in a rather undeveloped area of wasteland at that time. And Sir Alasdair became a member of the Committee on Safety of Medicines in about the early 1980s. That was set up, of course, in the aftermath of thalidomide tragedy by Sir Derek Dunlop to ensure that for the first time, medicines would only reach the public when they were judged to be safe, of good quality, and I nearly said effective, but Alasdair would have pulled me up on that, shown efficacy. And then in 2003, well, he was appointed chair of that committee, as you can see, and then in 2003, he became the first chairman of the newly created Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, the first chair, and that was to mark the bringing together of medicines control and medical devices. And over the years of Alasdair's leadership, he further expanded that role, not in the way of a kind of takeover, but really, I believe, to strengthen the science base. First of all, creating the clinical practice research data link out of the former GP database. And critically, Alasdair oversaw the merger with the National Institute for Biological Standards and Control that you've heard so much about over the recent year, delivering not just the cutting-edge science, but those biological standards, the batch release of vaccines that are relied on worldwide. So now I'll turn to Alasdair's central message, that regulation follows science. And I think we ask, how was that truly manifest in his leadership? And it was demonstrated throughout his leadership, I believe, in 4 ways. First of all, as a clinical pharmacologist, the foundation of regulation, and may it always be so. By the innovative methodologies and systems that he drove through, increasing the use of real-world data, a very eclectic and inclusive approach to science, and importantly, collaborating nationally and internationally. And I asked myself, turning to the first, the principles of pharmacology, what example could I pick out of so many that would exemplify how Alasdair's pharmacological thinking really coloured every aspect, every issue that we dealt with? And actually one that came immediately to mind, and it might not be obvious to colleagues here, related to the introduction of a new smoking cessation agent, the very first non-nicotine agent for smoking cessation. and rapid uptake in the NHS, and a very swift detection of a signal, a very serious signal of seizures and fatalities. Mapped out those ADR reports from time to initiation, showed that to Alasdair, and he said one word: dose. And that was his insight, laser-like insight, straight to the heart of the issue. And if you read Hansard, which I have to do, on the 8th of November 2001, when Dr. Liam Fox asked, what is happening with bupropion, that mainstay of public health and smoking cessation? And I was able to say, we amended that dosage regime to delay the increase from day 4 to day 7, and the adverse event signal went away. And it's that purity of insight that might have taken many another regulator, this is the Canadians bemoaning their lack of expertise, took many another regulator to get to that point. Of course, we benefited enormously from Alasdair's leadership and championing of the yellow card scheme. Again and again we're asked, is it not outmoded? Has it not passed its sell-by date? But that rapid ability to detect an emerging signal, Alasdair knew was the cornerstone of our world. He championed it. He welcomed the report of an independent review on access to data, and so for the first time we allowed patients and carers to report to us. And as you probably know, most of the reports on the COVID vaccine adverse effects that are observed come from just that community, first-hand, that enables us to act swiftly. Alasdair's growing international reputation for leadership in the field led to the Institute of Medicine's calling him in to that landmark report, a report that changed our world because for the first time it drove us to look at safety very early on in product development, to start to have greater authority to mandate safety studies. And I know there's many a now that the Commission on Human Medicines looks at those safety studies now, before the medicine is even introduced. And to have performance goals, timeframes around action. So his contribution there led to worldwide reform of drug safety surveillance. So now I'll just give you a few examples of the kinds of issues that Alasdair used to transform regulation. I think some in this room will remember the TGN 1412, the cytokine storm that put those 6 healthy volunteers, young men, in intensive care at risk of their lives. But Alasdair knew beyond this, we had to change the way we looked at first-in-man studies, always looking beyond to strengthen regulation. Those chest x-rays showing what a cytokine storm looks like with those infiltrates and what it does to your neutrophils as well. What about devices, the PIP implant scandal and the need to take on the regulation, the safety surveillance of medical devices? And that's still with us now, how to get a risk-proportionate approach to medical devices. And then there's an issue very close to Sir Alasdair's heart, I know, is drug interactions with warfarin. He drove and drove the focus on anticoagulants and made sure that it's still ingrained in us. If there's a COVID pandemic, let's look again at what the advice is that people need to have to use those critical products, critical for health, but also such a narrow therapeutic index. And of course, Alasdair's special affinity with HIV, and I'm so pleased that this session is going to hear more about that. His publications on drug interactions and the fact that I think the Liverpool Interaction Online Guide is used the world over to help use these essential medicines safely. I think our contribution seems small in comparison, chasing out those marketeers of the fake kits that give people false reassurance, or indeed always vigilant for signals in Botswana, where the signal of neurotube defect was detected with periconceptual use of dolutegravir, enabling us again to work through that and to ensure, together with the WHO, this vital antiretroviral can continue to be used. And it wouldn't be fair, really, not to mention malaria. Alasdair would be so pleased to know that as we speak at NIBS, the batches are being tested and released for Mosquirix, the first vaccine for malaria, and the fact that the WHO, on the basis of the initial studies, now recommends it for use. So a whole swathe of issues where Alasdair drove the way forward. So throughout all of this, regulation has followed science. And now for the last part of my talk, I'd like to turn to the future, because that's exactly what he would want us to do. Are we looking at a change in direction following EU exit, a complete descent into being what we call, I think, a third world regulator, or at least what the EU calls, or building on these foundations that Alasdair has built to have a key role in the UK's life sciences vision? And I think you can tell from the way I'm speaking that it is the latter. The COVID pandemic really has given us a catalyst for change as regulators. And right across the areas of our activity, from the vaccines, the ventilators, the CPAP devices, the antivirals coming through the pipeline, thankfully, and that challenging issue of diagnostics, regulation follows science. And I think it's clear to see, as we stand here today, some of us with sore arms from our booster jabs, that actually we are all benefiting from that ability to become agile, exactly as Alasdair would have wished. Because being a watchdog or a policeman doesn't fit the bill. An enabling regulator is what is needed. So we introduced these new approaches, and I'll perhaps take you down memory lane from a year ago, where we had shortened the vaccine development timeline. We approved the vaccine trials within about a week, sometimes shorter, looked at any SUSARs as they became available, rapidly reinstating the trials as soon as the DMC had pronounced, and that enabled that data to be generated in the shortest possible time. And more importantly, we instituted what we call rolling reviews, those parallel work tracks looking at different packages of data as soon as it emerges and is fed into the scientific advisory system. I'm afraid I think I can look at Sir Munir with some affinity because of those long, long hours, weekends and evenings spent looking at data as soon as it appears. And it might sound so obvious to anyone not in our space that you don't wait until the package is tied up with pink ribbon and delivered to you. So, as Alasdair would have wished, we planned the proactive vigilance studies, this is the Pfizer vaccine as it happens, 6 months before approval a year ago tomorrow, in fact. 6 months planning ahead to those vigilance studies, just as Alasdair envisaged with the Institute of Medicine's report, that would actually enable us to hit the ground running with efficient monitoring systems, giving the public that extra layer of assurance. And of course, everyone will remember that rather beautiful graph in the New England Journal paper with separation of the curves around 7 days. And we don't often see efficacy of that level. We certainly hadn't expected it. We spent a long time in our regulatory discussions talking about maybe 50%. And so that hope that came from that level of efficacy was truly, truly inspirational. We adapted our pharmacovigilance further, building on the yellow card, establishing a vaccine monitor to look in more intense detail at a cohort. And that's going to be very important for areas such as pregnancy, but also using advanced digital tools, artificial intelligence to sift through reports. We had expected 100,000. We're now over 400,000. We can't employ enough scientists and clinicians and statisticians to deal with each one. And so the tools of artificial intelligence support picking up trends, and then the minds can be usefully employed on what they're telling us. And as you might expect, we're picking up and running with what the life sciences vision has suggested. We're concerned, of course, about things like TTS, the thrombotic thrombocytopenia syndrome, but will the clue be in genetics? And so we're going to be establishing a yellow card biobank out of the yellow card data, enabling us to look for those genetic clues, marry it up with, I think you can see in the next slide, our electronic healthcare records for phenotype, and then researchers will be able to come to us and say, look, let's look at the data you have, use the linkages, and ultimately, if we strike gold, there will be screening tools that enable genetic aspects to be screened out. No more TTS, which has been a source of such concern to all of us. And then to our offer, and I think this is where Alasdair would have been so pleased, building on all of this to deliver an innovative licensing and access pathway. What does that truly mean? What is different? It builds on the principle of fix it while you fly, but it also brings everyone on board, from the NHS to the health technology assessment, and that integrated view at the very outset of drug development will enable a more bespoke pathway to be followed, taking some of the uncertainties out of drug development, and a smoother pathway. And yes, we've given ourselves a performance goal, IOM would be pleased, of reducing the development pathway by half. And will we make it? I think we're on our way. What it looks like in practice is that concerted blue pathway where everyone is feeding in, not just the NHS and the HTA colleagues, but patient groups, describing what they think patient-reported outcomes should be measuring. And with that iterative regulatory review, we put up front a lot of decision-making that means that the final decision on benefit-risk should be a well-prepared one. The first innovation passport, yes, was for something pretty rare, von Hippel-Lindau, granted in April, and that was a very successful partnership. But I'm pleased to say that not everything coming through ILAP, as we call it, is as rarefied, thankfully. There are commoner conditions, metastatic breast cancer, for example, and we will be using these tools to have a much broader look at what innovation means compared with perhaps the US breakthrough designation or the EMA prime designation. One of the tools, as we call them, that we'll be using is better use of the real-world data that comes from the Clinical Practice Research Data Link. And our SPRINT service, speedy recruitment into trials, actually looks for eligible patients and, not difficult, marries them up with the GP practice so a conversation can happen. It's not driven, it's a conversation. If you're interested, this is the trial site. Decentralised trials will make it much more convenient to participate, and our objective is so that clinical trials can get moving much more quickly. And I think with the life sciences vision that seeks to make the UK the best place to develop products, I think speedy recruitment into trials is going to be one of the big attractions. Turning then to Alasdair's regulation follows science. And I do think that that has to coalesce into regulatory science. Earlier this year, we had a roundtable debate at the Academy of Medical Sciences about what might be the priority areas for research in regulatory science, and how might we, in a collaborative sense, be working better together to actually make sure that the regulatory decisions are well informed, but also the tools and methodologies are just as well supported. Alasdair, of course, would have had something to say about all of this, and without going through it in any detail, many, many times he examined regulation. And I think what he essentially gave us was the drive to look constantly to reinvent and refresh regulation. Never rest back and think it's all done, and always apply those principles of pharmacology. Alasdair would have been thrilled and delighted that NIBSC was chosen to launch a major new science initiative, a new ministerial council, and the Office for Science and Technology Strategy, which I believe Sir Patrick Vallance is leading. And as we celebrate together this wonderful 90th anniversary, I'd like to reflect that not only did one of the founders of this great society, Sir Henry Dale, found this society, he also founded NIBSC. So that's this umbilical cord that we feel we have to BPS. His chair is our most treasured possession. And going to sit on Sir Henry's chair just makes you feel that we're all in it together. And I do invite colleagues to come to NIBSC and see all of this. So finally, we talk about national collaboration, and I know that there have been many occasions when the NHS has talked about how Alasdair's gift at convening was used to bring together various parties, and we need to build on this. And of course, internationally, as bringing this to a close, I'd like to just illustrate that this isn't in name only. Our partnership, which we call Access, with Australia, Canada, Switzerland, Singapore, delivered a really good guideline in March on the strain changes. So what are we doing today? Strain changes in COVID vaccines, I should say. Today we're looking at Omicron to see what indeed we can do to deliver an adapted vaccine in 100 days. Just to finish with what Alasdair would have said, whether in the spread of infectious disease, the trade in counterfeits, or global sourcing of raw materials for legitimate products, the world at large is our operating environment. The UK regulatory system, thanks to Alasdair, has a strong reputation, both within Europe and beyond, but it's so important that we work hard to maintain that position so that we can exercise appropriate influence in global issues for the benefit of public health worldwide. So Sir Alasdair's legacy, as we've noted, has really impacted regulation all over the world in the best interests of patient safety and of public health. What can I say? He's benefited more people than will ever know his name, but when we say Alasdair Breckenridge, we know that it stands for Regulation Follows Science. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Raine. That was very insightful. If you just stay up there for questions. It was a great look into the impact of Sir Alasdair's work and the future of his legacy. Do we have any questions from the floor? If not, we've got one question at the back.
Thanks so much for your talk. I thought that was really inspirational. I was fascinated by the plans for becoming much more integrated in the whole process of developing new medicines. Once you become a partner and a collaborator in the process, obviously there's a risk that you may then be perceived as perhaps being less independent. And with Alasdair's legacy of needing to keep an international reputation, how do you preserve that reputation when you become maybe like part of the team?
Alasdair would have said just that. And when we merged with NIBS, he was extremely careful, and we set up quite a lot of internal governance to ensure that even if we were involved, for example, in batch releasing Mosquirix or another aspect of the Omicron adapted vaccines, that we would ring-fence decision-making by the regulator. We need to refresh those guidances and policies, particularly in the broader environment that we're now in with integration. So that balance between independence and integration has to be front of mind all the time, and I can assure you it is.
Okay. Any further questions? I've got one question. The ethos of regulation following science is a fantastic one. However, I feel that sometimes as clinicians working within the NHS and working in research, we can feel that regulation can be a barrier to achieving our sort of clinical research. How can we sort of break down those barriers in the wake of COVID-19 and integrate regulation more into clinical research?
It's a truly important and a timely question. One of the things we've done, and again, it would have been very close to Alasdair's heart, is create new legislation, the Medicines and Medical Devices Act. And top of the list, we're about to consult on new clinical trials regulation, which tries to do, Lizzie, just what you've said, streamline but remove barriers. Sometimes having things on the face of legislation effectively becomes a barrier. It should be an enabler. We're particularly debating, and there'll be a public consultation, whether we should do more to encourage research, for example, in pregnancy.
Yeah.
So we can look to it to drive, but we don't want it to be a barrier. So please join in a consultation exercise, because we want you to do your research for all the important deliverables you're looking to.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Raine.
Thank you.